A reducer is a function to mutate the state or data in the store. Because of its unintuitive name, a lot of people doesn't know what the it means when they first saw the term. Let's create a reducer now and look at the syntax. So a reducer is essentially a function with a very specific signature. The first argument is the state that's currently inside the store, and the second argument is something what we call an action payload, which is basically the data that we will pass in when we trigger the reducer later. We will come back to this action argument in just a bit. It is easier to explain it when we see it in action. For now, we'll console log out both of the arguments just for demonstration. Now a reducer function has a very specific trait. That is, whatever we return in this function will override the entire state in the store. And that's how a reducer can modify the state in the store. For now, we will return the state as it is, and we will export this reducer function. Once we have defined a reducer, we need to register it. And to do that, we can use another hook function called useReducer. The hook function will set the reducer as its first argument and the initial state as its second argument, which in our case will be our state variable. Now the useReducer hook will return us an array. The first element of the return array is the reactive version of the state, similar to what would have happened to the data passed to the useState hook function. Now the second element in a return array is what we call a dispatcher function. The dispatcher function is a function to trigger the reducer registered by this hook. And the first argument that we pass to the dispatcher function will become the action argument inside the reducer. Let me show you what I mean. But before we do that, let's refactor our code here, because I don't think we need to declare our state variable up there anymore. We can simply pass it directly to our useReducer hook function. And now we will also modify the value prop in our provider component. So we're passing in the reactive state and also the dispatcher function. This will allow us to access the dispatcher function in any component in our app. The dispatch function will trigger the reducer, and the state is a representation of all the data in a store. And that means we can read or modify our global state anywhere that we like in our app. Let's try to call the dispatch function. We'll go to our home page and we'll run our dispatch function in the onClick event listener of this button. Just for demonstration, I'll call the dispatch function with an argument of some silly string. Remember, this argument will become the action of the reducer. And remember, our reducer at the moment does nothing but merely console logging the state and the action argument. Let's go to the browser and see what will happen. Whoops, we got an error. Seems like I have broken the rule of the hooks, because I'm calling the useReducer hook function in a global scope. Let's move it inside the global provider component. And seems like that fixes the issue. And now to trigger our reducer, we simply need to click on this little button here. And as you can see in the console, we are seeing the state and the action argument from the reducer. The action is ABC, which is exactly what we pass to the dispatch function, and state is the data in our store. Now passing a string as the action of the reducer doesn't seem to be very helpful, since we can literally pass anything to the dispatcher function. A more useful data structure would be an object. Typically, we would pass an object that contains two properties. A type property that defines the operation type, which in our case here, we wanted to update the only field in our store, which is the hey key. And the second property is the payload, which is whatever data that is associated to our operation. In this context would be the new value of the hey key. So ideally, after running the dispatch function, we would like to see ice cream inside our global store. Let's refactor our reducer so it will work as expected. Now we're assuming the action is an object that contains two properties, the type and the payload. And type could be a variety of different strings, and we need to handle each string on a case-by-case basis. The easiest way to achieve this is to use a switch statement. Currently, we only got one case, which is update hey, and the logic is to update the hey property. So what I'm going to do is to return a new object that contains everything in the current state, but I'm overriding the hey property, and the value will be equal to action.payload. For the default case of the switch statement, we'll simply return the state as it is. And now let's go back to the browser, and we'll open up the developer tool, and we'll click on our global provider component. And now notice that currently we have hey mate. The moment when I click on the button, it changes to hey ice cream. Isn't that great? This is basically how a reducer works. And again, its purpose is to update the data in the store. Alright, before we end the lesson, let's quickly make some improvement on our code. Since the reducer operation is fixed, let's create a constant for that. And we'll reference it both inside the reducer and also when we call the dispatch function in the home page. The benefit of having this action object is that it makes refactoring a lot easier in the future if we ever need to do so. Alright, key takeaways for this lesson. Reducer is a function that mutates a state in our state management store. We can register a reducer using the useReducerHook function. We use the dispatcher function returned by the useReducerHook to trigger the reducer. That's it for now, and I'll see you again in the next video. If you would like to see more content, consider supporting us by becoming a member at my website, Acadea.io. It is similar to Patreon, but in return, you get a lot of premium tutorials and lessons. If you can't become a member, that's totally fine. We are just happy that you are here. We spend a lot of time and energy to produce high-quality videos for you. Feel free to check out our other videos on YouTube, and if you can leave a thumbs up, you will really make my day. If you subscribe, I would jump for joy, and I'll make more videos for you. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you next time.